name is Ayana Davis. I am a development associate within the Alumni Relations and Development team. I will be your host today, and I'm super excited to be here because I also submitted my portfolio to be reviewed. As a multidisciplinary artist, specializing in photography, I really want to move closer to using my craft to support myself and those in my community. So today's session will be split into two sections. The first 25 to 30 minutes will feature our panelists detailing their careers and experiences presenting their portfolios. And then the second half will feature our panelists evaluating portfolios submitted to them by graphic design candidates. Also during the second half, Tom and Marie will evaluate our portfolios while sharing essential practices and principles. And just so folks know, only the first half will be recorded, just kind of out of safety and comfortability. I know sharing your portfolio can be a vulnerable process, so I want to make sure to respect everyone's privacy with that. But you'll be able to find the first half of our session on YouTube after we finish. Our panelists for today are two outstanding alums, Tom Tian and Marie Otsuka. Tom graduated from the University of Chicago with a bachelor's of arts in political science. Yes, hi, Tom. In the year since, he's been drawing cartoons for the Chicago Maroon and has designed U Chicago's Thinker Toys. Tom has directed user interface and user experience design for places like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Sustain Chicago. And currently, Tom specializes in brand identity at Firebelly Design in Portland. Marie graduated from the University of Chicago with a Bachelor of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies. She then went on to earn her Master of Fine Arts in Graphic Design from the Rhode Island School of Design. Marie is a designer and programming working on fonts, websites, tools, and books. Currently, she draws in typefaces and develops type-oriented tools at Occupant Fonts. And without further ado, I will pass things off to Marie to get us started for today.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction. I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Can you all see my presentation? All right, great. So hi, everyone. My name is Marie Otsuka, and I wanted to do just a brief intro of my career path so far, and sort of like where I started and then what I do now. So, oops, there's some rising issues here. Okay. So I wanted to talk about my path so far actually in typefaces because that's where my expertise is. And so I am starting with Gotham, the typeface at U Chicago, obviously, and something I think you all are familiar with. This was where basically during my 4 years in undergrad, I was starting to get to know design through my work with RSOs. Tom was a really great mentor in that process. Like we met in, I think, the MARC, what was the student organization, but I started making a lot of work for other student organizations. I was also working a student job at the college programming office. And I gained a lot of technical skills there, just learning basic design software and making collateral for the university. Let me just make sure. Oh, okay. Let's see. Are my slides advancing properly or no? I'm not able to hear anyone, but
on my end, I see your keynote, but it's just the first slide with hi exclamation mark.
Oh, Okay, sorry. Let me try resharing.
I do a little, jig in the meantime.
Is it advancing now or no?
It still isn't.
Okay, strange. Do you see like my keynote in non-presenter mode now?
Yeah.
And you see it moving in that zone?
Yep.
That's super strange. Has anyone come across this before? Where it seems like it's not. I guess I can also show, just try to present within this interface, even though that's not ideal. Okay, well, we'll have to deal with this for now. Guess move those out of the way. You will be able to assign grid in the background, but I guess that's not the end of the world. Okay, so I already started talking about Gotham, time at UChicago, sort of my first dabble into design. I ended up not going into design right away, though. I started working at a consulting job and ended up thus using a lot of Microsoft projects, and then also as a result of that, using a lot of Calibri. Unfortunately, I mean, it's fine for small text, but it's not great for everything. Then I switched over from consulting to actually doing a full-time design job. And I started working for this nonprofit called the UN Global Compact in New York. And so I was using their corporate typefaces or brand typefaces as part of the Global Compact's identity system. And these were the two typefaces that I was getting to know intimately, working inside designer. And I really realized from between working in consulting and working as a designer that I really enjoyed this work as a designer, but I wasn't really learning too much about design within this environment, since I was the only designer basically, and I didn't really have any sort of, all of the input I was getting was from the content standpoint and not the design standpoint. So I decided to take some internships. I ended up working for IDEO for 2 summers, and their typefaces were Sentinel. I was also at the Rhode Island School of Design, and there's kind of this chaos of using, I mean, this is just a small handful, some of the typefaces I was getting to know during that process. So we had like thousands and thousands of fonts in our shared drives that we went through as we made work between those years. So this is really, I think, where I actually learned what graphic design was about, and also really started to understand what typography meant in design. I also have some sort of monospace typefaces here because I ended up doing some more programming and coding during this period and making some work for the web. And it was in 2018 when I graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design that I transitioned a little bit between being a typographer and a type designer. So that means between a type user to a type maker. And that was when I joined Occupant Fonts, which is a type foundry based in Rhode Island. And so as a type foundry, we make fonts, but there is sort of a training period that in the beginning. And my first typeface that I worked at the Foundry was called Allium Rounded. It was actually a design of my boss, Cyrus Highsmith, where it was basically a rounded cut of an existing design. So it was more of a production job than original design, but it was something that allowed me to learn a lot about this more specific niche skill of type design within larger graphic design fields. I also learned about these formats called variables. If you hadn't heard about variables, it basically means all these different kinds of styles of the font are embedded into a single font. Then I finally got to releasing and publishing my own typeface. This was a design, a monospace design, and it was called Pentameter Variable. But anyway, so right now I'm currently working both as a typographer and a type designer. But in a way, it's a little bit more fluid. I think as a creative, as a practitioner in a creative field, there tends to be a lot of things kind of in and around your roles. So on some days, I might be looking at these proofs, really looking closely at type and letter forms. On other days, I might be creating websites that use these typefaces that I'm designing. Here I'm showing a website that sort of can be read from both right to left, since my Foundry Occupant Fonts is actually a subsidiary of a larger Japanese company called Morisawa. And so we have access to all their Japanese typefaces, and we're projects experimenting with how we can combine our typefaces together. Some of the other things I'm doing is also creating tools for occupant fonts as an engineer. So I'm designing these tools and UIs and interfaces that will help the production process of typefaces. On the other hand, I'm also teaching in a limited capacity, not as a full-time professor, as some electives that I like to teach. And specifically, I think teaching is a great way in a creative field to kind of explore some questions with students together. This is an example of sort of a specimen of student work that I collected from a class I call Web Type. So it's really a collection of, or kind of a combination of interests, both from the type perspective that I have, as well as the web design and web development perspective and sort of exploring what we might be able to do, expressive experimental approach with students. I'm also collaborating with other designers to make website specimen. This, for example, is a web specimen for pentameter days that I had designed. I worked with a designer, Laurel Schwolst, who is really interested in the poetics of the web. And then I also worked with a former student of mine, Tiger Dingsung, who ended up composing the audio for this website. So this was a really nice collaboration where I feel like a lot of these worlds collided, where I was working with students, but I was also working with other graphic designers. I was handling the web development, like the programming part, as well as, it was like my own typeface being featured here. But essentially, this is a website that shows the 72 micro seasons of Japan. And so it's also kind of drew my cultural background. I moved to the United States, Japan. I was in middle, but my family is still back there. So this was like a really nice project where I felt like it captured a lot of my interests and my background in a really nice way. So anyway, I'm kind of, it's a little bit difficult when I try to describe my practice and all these different things. This is kind of important. We're talking about sharing portfolio, because I think my website actually doesn't have a portfolio currently, but it's because I basically make a portfolio every time I'm responding to a client for a proposal or they're hoping to see work, because I want to pick and tailor what projects are relevant for that particular client. And so if it makes sense, I can do a quick share of a sample portfolio, but maybe I can do that later when there's time, since I know, I've already been talking for a little bit, and it may be more helpful to kind of look at Tom's perspective on how to actually put together a portfolio before seeing this. I'm curious what you all think.
You've got some time, Marie, if you'd like to keep going. But to save
Okay.
time, I'll give you like a few minutes and then we'll switch over to Tom.
Okay, sounds good. I'll just keep this super cursory and quick, but just to show you what I might put together so this was some sample work that I collected for pitching work for an arts institution doing a new digital publication. And so they're all sort of around the arts. And because my work is also interactive, I don't always do this sort of PDF in static form, but are you able to see this PDF currently?
What I see on my screen is your slide that says a sample portfolio.
Okay, let me try that again. Do you see the PDF now?
Yes, all good.
Okay, great. So just to talk through what I might do really quickly when I'm putting something together. So I put together several examples of sort of different ways that I think about making a digital publication. So the first, for example, is a website I did for someone who is really interested in website sustainability or of the internet and the energy use of the internet. So created a website that uses the least amount of energy use possible. And I worked with some collaborators to make it solar powered. It's designed in a way where we don't actually load fonts, for example. So I might bring up an example where I worked with a print designer, Jason Vaughan, to put together a whole campaign based around an arts installation. This was in Harvard Yard, and how like the website as well as the installation and all the collateral might work together. This was for a publication that puts together what the activities of like a global website. This was around the exchange program and kind of putting together a website that feels dynamic in the same way that program encourages a lot of exploration and things like that. This was a website for an artist who's making music in the depths of the ocean, and it is a website that only goes live actually during the full moon. So we wanted to capture the evolution of the full moon as part of the website. So basically, it's a time-sensitive website where when you approach the website on certain days, it would basically show the phase of the moon and then become a player when it's during the full moon. This was a website for and thing he was really interested in was highlighting the bits that are also accommodating his music. So we made sure that things like the background color of the websites responded to the album, having really full screen videos, like really talking through the ways that what the client is interested in and their sort of unique approach is reflected in the design and the approach of the website, basically. So I'll keep it at that, I think. And so let me stop sharing. I think the important thing here too is having the chance to talk through your work and being able to talk through your portfolio examples in a way that relates to what the client might be interested in.
Thank you, Marie. I personally really like the the phases of the Moon Project, and I will definitely hit you up after this session to get some more information on your portfolio. Um, Again,
Thank you.
thank you for sharing. And Tom, go ahead and take it away.
All right, folks. Quick preface here. Just want to make sure that everyone can see my screen. It should be not cool. All right. So let's jump into designing your portfolio, subtitle for fun and maybe occasionally profit. So this, for the curious, I created this in Figma, which is basically an industry standard interaction design program. If there are any bugs, just feel free to interrupt and let me know. And without further ado, hello and welcome. Who am I? I am Tom Tian. I use he, him pronouns. As Ayana mentioned, I graduated all the way back in 2010 in political science. Trying to not think about how long ago that was. I'm currently in Portland, Oregon. The studio I work at right now, Fire Belly Design, is headquartered in Chicago, but we have a diffuse team. And there, the studio is pretty small. We have a grand total of 10 employees. And as such, I wear a lot of different hats. So I mostly do branding and visual identity design, and by which I mean things like logos, which is what comes to mind. I think first for a lot of folks when thinking about graphic design as a profession, but also things like the say color palette, how that logo gets used, what typefaces are going to be part of that system, and then we drill down deep to its other applications across different media. So things like print, where we're specifying things like Pantone colors and CMYK to make sure that things reproduce consistently, to online elements like interactions, animations, and so on and so forth. But that, even though that's sort of the bread and butter of the studio, what I mostly do, a lot of it is also UI UX design, specifically in like a website context. I do environmental design, which covers signage, wayfinding, exhibitions, and expo displays as well. I do motion graphics, so animations, 3D modeling, which is pretty tightly related to environmental design because clients want to see renders of those displays in the space. And it helps folks just see or try to understand what the scale of is you're designing. I do data visualizations and GIS. And then this is sort of in descending order of how frequently I actually do things, some illustration, type design, and photography. So the path I took is kind of a meandering one. Most of my design background is self-taught. A lot of it is at working for the Chicago Maroon, where I did a lot of editorial illustrations, but then as the managing editor, I basically took it upon myself to redesign the paper. And that was sort of my first exposure and roots in like the wider world of doing layouts, typesetting, and so forth. Right after college, I didn't graduate into the recession, but it was still I spent actually a couple of years basically living at my parents' place. I was working an unpaid internship. At the same time, I was doing a production design internship for a business-to-business agency out in the suburbs of Chicago. And it was very much a sort of like cut your teeth kind of work. You're resizing a lot of advertisements, preparing things to be sent to a press as opposed to doing original design work. But that I will say actually was a very eye-opening and ultimately I think very useful experience, because a dose of humility I think never really hurts. And in my life right now, I also do production design as well as original work. And so at the same time I was freelancing, I had friends from college who were starting their own publication. So I was doing some editorial illustrations in that capacity. And then I became an in-house designer at UChicago Alumni Relations. You have probably seen some of the stuff that I have designed that in that capacity. If it was spam, I do apologize. I was taking marching orders. So anyway, and then I left UChicago ARD in 2015 and became a designer at Firebelly. And I've been there ever since. And I have, for more than half that time now, been a senior designer there. And just a small selection of the things I've been doing at Firebelly. So we have branding projects like here in the top left for a small company, a startup called OK Inside, which is about behavioral tracking and not quite therapy, but really like behavioral modification through an app platform. Things like this flat packed modular display system on the bottom left for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which is very satisfying to put together. And it was reusable, and right now I think it's in the atrium of their headquarters. Some photo collage work for a client called Braver Collective, who work with survivors of childhood sexual abuse on their road to recovery. We have some enamel pins that were part of a system here for a nonprofit called Girls Garage out in Berkeley. And they are a sort of a summer and after school camp that's all about cultivating sort of practical building and design and architectural skills for girls. And then we also, as a studio, do some side projects. So here was a display for Typeforce, which is a annual exhibition of typographic design and lettering that Firebelly has put on for 14 years now, basically. And then this is a quick sample of some of the work that I do in digital space here for Sustain Chicago, which is was the city's sustainability programs website under the old administration of Rob Emanuel. All right, and being mindful of time, I will try to go through things quickly. So just some real talk. Portfolios are hard, and some of the advice that I will be talking about, I think, is probably a little bit more applicable to folks who are just starting out in their careers or thinking of a career shift. So with that out of the way, portfolios are hard because you got to talk about yourself, you got to talk about your work. You're going to feel pretty conflicted. We all have done things that we maybe aren't terribly proud of, but you feel like you have to show something. And that's just difficult to juggle with emotionally. And second, your portfolio is going out to people who, for the most part, don't know you from anyone else. And you're going to be doing that without being able to, at least first, talking about your work in person. The good news is, like with a lot of things, this just gets easier with practice. So because creative work and vulnerability go hand in hand, I think it's just really important to be patient with yourself and give yourself some grace when you can. It's hard. You are not going to get it right on the first shot. So having said that, what is one possible way of tackling this? A long short of it is just treat your portfolio for what it is, which is a tool. And as that tool, it is functionally analogous to resumes and cover letters in that they are what creates a first impression of you to a prospective employer. So depending on the studio or firm that you're applying to, it's the first thing a hiring manager who might not have a design background will see. So it's that sort of screening tool. But more importantly, and I think this really does bear mentioning, it's also what you leave behind after the interview. So it basically bookends the interview and is a thing that will hopefully get you to that intermediate point. So in my capacity as a senior designer, I do review portfolios for prospective candidates. And there are a couple things I really look for. And because I was on a kick, everything starts with a C. Okay. Context, I think, is definitely, goes without saying, super important. So who is the client and what were their asks when you're doing design work? Problem solving is such a key part of it. And I can't really understand your project fully if I don't know what it was supposed to address. I would say whether or not someone has clearly explained their roles and decisions. This, I think, is a area where being a UChicago alumnus or alumna gives you a leg up, because God knows we have to write so many papers in our lives. So that's something where where I think other portfolios from art school graduates reviewed have been kind of lacking at times. Craft. So do you have a sound command or the programs that programs the skills, and did you mind the details? Like I mean, showing finished work that has a very obvious mistake in it is like misspelling the name of a previous employer in your resume. It's just going to stick out like a sore thumb. Curation. So are you prioritizing the right strengths and skills for the job that someone is hiring for? Creativity is sort of a tough one. And definitely does not mean originality in this context. It's really about whether or not the way someone solved a creative problem was something that surprised me. Like, is it something that I would never have thought of, for instance? And last but not least, character. Like, you know, at the end of the day, you're being hired, yes, for your skills, but also for your culture fit. So how much of your personality as an individual comes through? And unfortunately, the subjective thing of like, hey, is that person someone I want to work with? That's a lot harder to solve. But the only thing you can do is put your best foot forward. Speaking of which, cool, bro. How do I get there? The sort of most general advice I can give is to start rough and then fill in the details as you go. And an outline is really, really important part of this. And also probably one of the tougher things to start with, because you have to be pretty candid and you know, kill a lot of your darlings in this phase. So what I would suggest is listing your disciplines in descending order of interest to you. So for instance, I'm a multidisciplinary designer, so I want to do more 3D work in my next job. So my portfolio starts off with OK Inside, which has a lot of 3D rendering to it, so on and so forth. And then take stock of all the projects that you've done, and then sort them by that list, and then by how proud that project makes you feel, sort of like within that bucket. So like here, this web project is the one that I'm most proud of, second, third, and so on and so forth. The toughest part is trimming the whole thing down. What I would say is that your typical hiring manager and art director is not going to have a huge amount of time on their hands to review your portfolio. So if you want folks to have a complete picture of you, I would say probably no more than 10 or 15 projects. Next is storyboarding each individual case study. You want each of your case studies to have a visual rhythm and this sort of upward flowing information gradient. And you can plot that out in thumbnails really quickly beforehand. And this is also the point where you would then look through your existing samples and say, okay, I want my case study to talk about this aspect of a project, but I don't have a work sample that exactly corresponds to it. And that leads us to number 3, which is sourcing. So if you have the time and the resources, treat your projects basically with the same pride that you put in them in the first place. So that might mean rephotographing or photographing and mocking up print pieces, rendering or re-rendering 3D models, embedding interactive prototypes, and so on and so forth. Basically, I know that like just throwing a screenshot up there sometimes is the most you can do, but if you have the time, that really does, that's a huge advantage. And last but not least, practice presenting your work. As Marie said, like when you're pitching yourself, whether or not that's in the context of an interview or you're customizing and tailoring your portfolio to a specific task, you will have to actually walk folks through, and there's no substitute for practice in that regard. And what I would say is certainly there are events like this where there are basically open portfolio review sessions, but your local chapter of AIGA, which is the National Professional Association for Graphic Artists, also will occasionally do portfolio review sessions. And there are also local art schools might also do that. So keep an eye out for those. And that's it. That is all she wrote, as I said. And I'm going to hand it back to Ayana now to move on to the next portion.
Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate all of the tips. I am also a first-time portfolio maker, so I look forward to getting some advice in the next part. But before we continue, I want to pause for questions. If anyone has questions, feel free to just unmute and let your questions rip. If not, we also have some questions that were sent in previously.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the overview. One question that came in beforehand, as you could imagine, is for reading recommendations. What are some of the best books that you've encountered, and books, in whatever genre, to learn more about typography and to learn more about graphic design?
Marie, I'll hand the type portion of that to you.
Well, the first book that comes to mind for me is actually a book that my boss wrote, but this is not like advertising. I think it's actually a really good book that explains how you might look at type, and it's called Inside Paragraphs. And it kind of goes through the way you might look at a paragraph or the page, and it really has to do with being able to look at the white shapes on a page. And so I highly recommend that. And I think there's also a book that a lot of people find really useful called Thinking with Type by Ellen Lupton. I think that's a really great introduction. I also have, I could also send a list of these great type introductory books along as a follow-up, I think, because there's definitely a lot of good stuff out there.
I think in the sort of general design world, for folks who are more interested in being typographers as opposed to type designers, the elements of typographic style is sort of the I don't know, holy text, as it were. It's also a gorgeously designed book. You owe it to yourself to really get a copy regardless of your interests. As for design books in general, or portfolio books specifically, I actually don't have one. And I think that's because I just think of portfolios as another design piece. It's not like the rules of like visual principles of design are somehow suspended because it's a portfolio. So I will send some a list of texts that I think are helpful as references, and both to consult after this, just being aware of time.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we definitely respond well to homework and reading recommendations. So I appreciate that. Ayana, I do have at least one more.
Mhm.
We'll see if we have enough time, because I do want to make sure you get your portfolio reviews. So one is, how do you incorporate feedback into your designs? Like, how do you know what to take, what not to take, and how do you incorporate that perhaps in any like revisions or modifications of your designs?
I can speak to that. When you're working under contract or at a firm, there are basically contractual guide rails. For instance, by the time you started working, you will have established a scope of work beforehand. So sometimes that's going to limit the number of hours you can actually invest. And you can just say, hey, look, it's written in ink. Like, if you want to renegotiate that, we can. Other times, I think if you conduct yourself professionally and have a good working relationship with people, most folks are reasonable. They respond well to I guess what you call like gentle pushback. If it begins to come down to like, hey, I want you to use this color because I like it, whatever, then I think that's more of a discussion of like, hey, we need to talk about how the working relationship is, because no one wants to work for a jackass.
Yeah, I think Tom kind of covered it well, but I feel like that feedback process is easy when you're working with a good client, basically. So it's almost like a lot of the work is like trying to find a good client base that you like working with and you want to collaborate with, really, and you enjoy getting their feedback that they like might push you into ways that you may not have had before, but is still an exciting direction, whereas it's not like a purely subjective thing. So I think, and what makes part of that process easier is, I think, going back to what Tom was saying, is design and arts work dependent on each other really well, because then I think they can then like also trust you to sort of make those decisions for them in a certain way.
Thank you, Marie and Tom, for your insight. Before going into groups, really quickly, I just want to thank you both for joining us today, and thank you to everyone who joined us live. You can join us for more Career Month events, such as the next webinar in the creative sequence, Entrepreneurship on the Menu. It features the career journeys of culinary entrepreneurs and food writers in our alum community. So if you're looking for a different way to get involved with food other than being a line cook, hopefully you can tune in for that. And don't forget to register for our programs newsletter to stay up to date. For the next 15 minutes or so, you'll have a few minutes to walk through your portfolio as if you were in a job interview, and then another few minutes to receive some critical feedback from either Tom or Marie. As I stated before, this part will not be recorded, so feel free to speak freely. We just want to make sure you're in a comfortable space to get the best help possible. And again, don't be shy. Feel free to email Tom and Marie or email Josh and I, if you've got more questions, want to make sure everyone kind of gets the most that they can. And I'll stop talking now so we can run into breakout groups and get some help.